Okay, so here we are. We have now the portion Acharei Mot and Kadoshim. And like I said, it's called Acharei Mot, means after the death. God gives Moses and Aaron, after the death of Aaron's two sons, that they went improperly into the Holy Temple and they died. That was in Parsha Shemini. And now God is telling them the proper way to go in to the temple. And so all the laws of the Yom Kippur service in the temple are in this week's Torah portion. And like I just said, this is read in the daytime of Yom Kippur. That's the Torah reading in the daytime. And then in the afternoon is read the portion which comes very, very soon afterwards in the same Torah reading, the same Torah portion, the Torah portion, the general portion called Acharei Mot, is a couple paragraphs after it finishes the service of the Holy Temple. Then it starts talking about these forbidden sexual relationships, and that's written in a little bit later. And that's what we read in the Mincha prayer of Yom Kippur. So let's have a look. Let's have a brief look. First of all, let's look briefly at the beginning, okay? The beginning of this week's Torah portion. Here we go. Oh, no. There we go. Good. Okay, Vayadaber Hashem Moshe, God spoke to Moses after the death of his two sons of Aaron, right? That we read about 2 weeks ago, how they went into the Holy Temple improperly. And there were all these different reasons that were given. They were drunk, because God immediately afterwards says you shouldn't drink before you go into the Holy Temple, and they didn't have the proper garments when they went in, and they weren't married. In any case, after the two sons died improperly, when they came too close to God, they came too close to God, and therefore they died. Let's just go. And God said to Moses, speak to Aaron, your brother. They should like this. He should not go anytime he wants to into the Kodesh, into the Holy Temple, to where the Holy Ark is. Asher al Aaron, which is the Kippur, which is the covering on the Ark. And you shouldn't die because because you have to go in to the Holy of Holies. And when you're in there, you have to light incense, special service. And this, by the way, was one of the several famous arguments of the Tzedukim. The Tzedukim were this destructive, anti-rabbinical element in Judaism. They were very powerful. They were very, very powerful. And especially in the Second Temple, they were powerful. But they already started, okay, the Second Temple. So it says, they said that Anan Yero, they said you have to light the incense and come in, because it says, they said whatever it says simply, that's what you have to do. And not forget about what the rabbis say. We're going according to the simple meaning. That's what the Tzedukim said. You have to go in with a cloud. In other words, you have to light the incense before you go into the Holy of Holies. That's what they said. And that's not so. That is not so. Okay, you can ask a question. What difference does it make? So they go in one way or the other. So the simple answer is, what difference does it make if your heart is in the middle of your, what is your heart a little bit over to one side? So put the heart where the stomach is. That's a big deal. But if there's a little tiny hole in a person's lung, it's a big deal. So of course that is a big deal. It's a very, very important human anatomy that everything has to be exactly where it is. Well, this is the anatomy of the whole universe. When the Kohen Gadol, when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, and this would bring blessing and stability and success into the whole world. That's what it says. So it was very important how he went to the. So now, this is what Aaron should come to the Kodesh with Apar ben Bakar, and now we're going to talk about the different laws, about what he did, the service of the Kohen Gadol, high priest. He would go into the mikveh 5 times. He would change his garments. All the work that he did in the inside, most of it that he went in the Holy of Holies was in simple white garments. And when he came out, he would wear these beautiful garments with the breastplate with all the diamonds in it, etc. Yeah. He would go to the mikveh, he would change himself 5 times. The big changes that were in Yom Kippur, we're going to have a look. Let's have a look. Here we go. Here's this. So here we have the first 2 commandments. In this is the book called Mitzvot Hashem, the commandments of God. It says in this week's Torah portion, Acharei Mot, the first half of this week's Torah portion, there are 2 positive commandments and 26 negative commandments. So let's run through them sort of quickly. First negative commandment, mitzvot lo taseh. A Kohen cannot come whenever he wants to into the Holy of Holies. Like it says, Al yavo b'kol eit ala kodesh mi beit la parochet. He cannot go into the Holy of Holies. This sentence is a warning, ela heichel, that he shouldn't come into the holy. That the holy is the place where the candelabra was, with the menorah and the face spread. It was on the candelabra was on the left and the face spread was on the right. That was called the holy, the heichel, and also the kodesh kodesh. There was only the ark with the tablets in it. A Kohen, this is only for the high priest. He can go in. What if a regular priest that goes into the Holy of Holies, no matter when, all the days of the year, and also a Kohen Gadol that goes in the other days of the year. But even if he goes in on Yom Kippur, but he goes into the Holy of Holies more than 4 times that he's supposed to go in, then the punishment is death from heaven. Of course, that doesn't exist, but it says in the last 40 years of the Holy Temple that there were 40 different Kohen Gadol that people wanted so much to go in. Be like none of an Avihu. They wanted to be close to God. And it says that they weren't to that level of holiness. What if a person goes into the Holy of Holies, but he makes a mistake, he doesn't do the proper service, etc., etc.? That's also punishment. That's the negative side of Yom Kippur. But the positive side is that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, has to do the service of Yom Kippur. Like it says, Bezot Yavo Aaron HaKodesh. And that's what this Torah portion talks about. Here's some of the highlights. This is a mitzvah of the service of Yom Kippur. And it's all explained in this week's Torah portion, which is you have to go in with incense. You have to burn this incense, ignite it in the Holy of Holies, in addition to the regular daily incense, which is done every day. And you have to bring in a Kohen Gadol, the high priest has to bring a ox, his own ox. He has to put the blood in the Holy of Holies. And then he takes 2 goats, the goats which are owned by the community, and one of them is sacrificed as what's called a chatas offering, and that blood is also sprinkled in the Holy of Holies. But one of them, interestingly enough, is pushed off this high mountain. Is mishlach la'azazel. It's pushed off of a high mountain alive. All this is done in the 4 white garments. And also the high priest has to bring his own. He brings 1 ram for olah, and etc. And this is the service of the Tamidim and the Musafim of the Kohen Gadol. And this is only done at the time of the Holy Temple. When the temple was destroyed, and in the 70 years between the first and second temple, this was not done. And that's it. That's the whole service in a nutshell of the Kohen Gadol. The negative part of it, he can't go in unnecessarily. And also the positive commandments, what he has to do. Okay, here, let's just go through a quick list of some of the commandments we had over here. What was it? 28 commandments we had. Let's go through. Most of them are negative commandments. Okay, right after this story, the details about going into the Holy of Holies and the service of Yom Kippur, it says here, puts his hand on it, he throws the, he's talking about sending this sheep, this goat. Okay, right after the service of Holy of Holies, v'chiper al mikdash HaKodesh, it says, Shabbat, this is Yom Kippur, Shabbat, Shabbaton it is, and you shall make yourself suffer. You're not supposed to eat or wash or wear shoes, etc., leather shoes on Yom Kippur. Not supposed to eat or drink. And the Kohen will, the one who is anointed, and he will put on these holy garments, and he'll al Kohanim al kol ha'am yechaper, and he will bring forgiveness for all of the Kohanim for any mistakes that were made in the temple and for all the Jewish people. And this will be an eternal chukat olam to lechaper al bnei Israel, to bring forgiveness for all the Jews for all their sins once a year. Remember, that's what we're learning in the Mimer in the morning, like God commanded Moshe. Okay, next commandment. Speak to Aaron and his sons and all the rest of the Jewish people and say to them, this is the thing that God commanded to say. A person of the Jewish people, when he slaughters a ox or a sheep or a goat in the camp or outside of the camp, and he has to bring it to the Oel Moed and make a sacrifice to God. In fact, okay, some people say that this is referring to that all animals, when a person wants to sacrifice, you can't eat mundane, regular food. You have to everything has to be eaten from, bring it to the temple. Other people say, no, that's not what this means. This is referring to that it's forbidden to make a sacrifice. If you want to eat food, if you want to make a sacrifice, you have to bring it to the Holy Temple. After the temple was built, it was forbidden to make sacrifices at home. People used to be able to make sacrifices at home. After the Torah was given, you could make sacrifices. It says the Torah was like this. There was a thing called a bama, and people could make sacrifices like free will offerings and things at home in their house, and then they could eat the offerings. They would burn certain parts and they would eat. And this was done all the time that there wasn't a temple. Really not all the time that there was the tabernacle. They couldn't do it in the desert. But when they came into Israel, there was 14 years when they were dividing the Israel up. In those days, everybody could do it on their own. And then they built the tabernacle in Shiloh, this place called Shiloh. There was like 369 years. There you couldn't, in that time you couldn't. But until the first temple was built, between then and then, you could offer what's called a bama. In any case, he's saying once the Holy Temple is built, you can no longer sacrifice in your, so it says, dam shafech, you should pour out the blood. Excuse me. Okay, here it says Rashi, B'muktashim katuv medaber. This is talking about if you want to make a sacrifice, you cannot make a sacrifice in your backyard. You have to bring it to all the time that the tabernacle is in place. And like we said, when there was the Mishkan, also the tabernacle was in the place called Shiloh in Israel, and after the temple, for sure not. So the Jewish people have to bring all their sacrifices that they bring to God and to the Oel Moed and now the Kohen spills the blood on the entrance, and you should not sacrifice anymore your sacrifices to the Seirim. What is the Seirim? It says to the demons. The Seirim Rekadusham. It says, in other words, don't make sacrifices to whoever you want to. Shahim Zonim Acharam. The Jewish people also, when they were very easily influenced by the non-Jews. Okay, here. A person of Israel, of the Ger, that he eats blood, I will put my face against that person. Blood, and I will cut him off from his people. You can't eat blood. Now, this is a very interesting law, eating blood. There's a lot of laws about this you have to learn if you want to become a rabbi. and it's in the Shulchan Aruch talking about salting meat. You have to salt meat in order to take out the blood. But interestingly enough, you only have to salt meat if you want to boil the meat, if you want to boil it. If you want to roast meat, you put it over the fire. You don't have to salt it. The fire takes out the blood. But listen to this. If you want to eat raw meat, all you have to do is wash it off the outside, and you can eat the meat with the blood inside of it. Yes, that's right. It's only forbidden to eat meat because that blood is considered to be meat. It's only forbidden to eat meat. Don't try it. I mean, I don't know anybody who does it. Because at first glance, you'd have to wash off, every time you took a bite, you'd have to wash off the blood that comes out on the surface. And some people say you don't have to do that, only if you cut it with a knife. But in any case, technically, this comes to show you that a lot of the laws of the Torah make absolutely no sense. There's three types of laws in the Torah. Laws that make sense, like don't kill and don't steal. Laws that are religious, like the holidays and things like that. And then there's laws that totally make no sense whatsoever. And this is one of them. Can't eat blood. What do you mean you can't eat? You can't eat blood only if the blood comes out. So that's why you have to salt meat before you boil it, because by boiling it, the blood comes into the water, and it could make the water forbidden, and then puts it back into the meat, and it's forbidden. So it says you can't eat blood because the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you. You want to do something with blood, either pour it out or use it on the altar for forgiveness, because the blood, therefore I said to every one of you, don't eat any blood. Even the ger, the converts, don't eat blood. Okay, here's another commandment. You should cover over the blood. A person that slaughters a bird or what's called a chaya, like a deer or an antelope. Who slaughters an antelope nowadays? I don't even know if anybody knows what it is, but if you ever get one and the rabbis say that it's kosher and you slaughter it, you have to cover the blood. If you slaughter a cow or a sheep or a goat, you don't have to cover the blood. But there's a commandment to cover the blood if you slaughter a chicken or a turkey and it's a proper slaughtering. Then you have to, a person of the Jewish people that hunts something, a chaya or a oaf. Chaya is, like we said, a deer, an antelope, or a bird. And you must pour out the blood and cover it with dirt. And from here we learn also that there's to be dirt underneath and dirt on the top also. Because the soul of the flesh is in the blood. And that's what I said to the Jewish people, don't eat it on the ground. Anyone who does, don't eat it, do not eat it. Anyone who does will be cut off. Okay, so now we have a couple of commandments over here. The commandment of the Kohen Gadol. Now we have the commandment of if you want to sacrifice a sacrifice, you have to do it in the Holy Temple, and you cannot eat blood. You have to spill the blood out. If you slaughter a bird or a deer, and you should let the blood fall into dirt and put dirt on top of it, and then you make a blessing on it. Another thing you shouldn't eat, don't eat a nevela or a treifa. Okay, a nevela means an animal that was not killed properly. Got run over by a car, died of natural causes. That's a nevela. It wasn't slaughtered. In order to eat an animal, you have to slaughter it properly. And there's a lot of laws involved. How to move your hand, how the knife has to be sharp. And treifa means an animal that you did slaughter it properly. You slaughtered it properly, but it had some sort of a blemish in one of its limbs. Had a hole in the heart, a hole in the lungs, a hole in the brain. Complicated laws, a hole in the food pipe, a big hole in the windpipe. The stomach had a hole in it. Right, if the leg was broken in certain places were up high. Same thing with birds. That's called treifa. In other words, the animal, generally speaking, treifa means it has some sort of a disease or a blemish or something that it wouldn't live for a year. But you slaughtered it properly. But then afterwards, you have to check it. That's why there's what we call glatt kosher. Glatt means it's smooth. We worry very much that there's a hole in the lungs. So therefore, after an animal is slaughtered, they take the lungs out and they expand the lungs. and they see if the air comes out or not. If it does, then it's treif. A whole big cow. Who knows? A cow is 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. I don't know what a cow is worth. But anyway, the whole thing is not edible. It's forbidden to eat. It's called treif. Okay, let's learn. So now this is what we read in the afternoon of Yom Kippur. Speak to the Jewish people and say like this, like we did in Egypt, you shouldn't do. And like they did in Canaan, that I bring you there, you also shouldn't do. Rashi says, this tells you that the Mitzrayim and the Canaanim, they were the most licentious of all of the nations. This, by the way, is where you learn that lesbianism is forbidden, even though it doesn't say explicitly in Torah. But that's what they would do. A woman would marry a woman, a woman would marry two men. Okay. Asher ani mevi etchem shama. That's what it says not to do. So let's have a look at what some of these things are. Let's go to this. Instead of learning it inside, we can learn a little bit. Okay, here we have. You cannot slaughter, we just finished learning, you cannot slaughter holy items. Now there's no such thing outside of the holy temple. Okay, that's what we learned. A positive commandment. You must cover blood if you slaughter a chaya or a oaf. A chaya is like a deer, we said, an antelope, something like that, or a bird. You have to cover it over. Here we go. Ready? Now we'll learn some of the negative commandments that are dealing with forbidden physical relationships, family relationships. It's a negative, just in a short way though, just one of the 10 commandments, fifth of the 10 commandments is you have to honor your mother and father. The family is of utmost importance in Judaism. Family, utmost importance in Judaism. All the leaders, the holiest people, they were all married. No such thing as a person not being married. They were all married. Abraham was married, Moses was married, Elijah the prophet was married. All the great rabbis were married. It's a very not good thing not to be married. And also a not good thing to have children. Not having children is not in your power, right? You have to try. But it's very important. Once a person is married and has children, then starts all these forbidden relationships. You might think to yourself, this is better not to get married. Then you won't have any sisters. You won't have any mother. You won't have any, right? You just abstain from everything. He says, no, that's not the way life goes. God wants us to have relationships, wants us to have families, but it has to be done properly. So here we go. Negative commandment. Don't approach forbidden sexual relationships, even without having actual intercourse. Like it says, a person should not, means to say, you shouldn't hug, kiss. Okay, what the details are, we'll find out later. But in generally speaking, a brother is not supposed to kiss a sister. Generally speaking, right? You'll find out what type of exceptions there are, but it's a thing you have to keep away from. Shem devorim amevim, because these are things that bring to improper relationships, kissing, hugging, etc. That are getting, and if it's done in a pleasurable way. Now there were big, really holy tzaddikim, especially among the Sephardic Jews, that they used to. The women used to kiss their hands and things like this. They don't think they would hug people, but nevertheless. Okay, in other words, this was done in a way that was absolutely, these people had absolutely, they were holy of holy people. And so they had no intention, even in any way, of getting any pleasure from it. It was just like shaking hands. Okay, but nevertheless, we don't. That's why religious people, usually they don't shake hands with women, and religious women don't shake hands with men, etc. You're not supposed to wink your eye, to talk with them, to joke around, and etc. It's forbidden from the Torah. There's more laws involved in this also. More laws in this also. All right, a negative commandment. A man, you're not allowed. Now, okay, now there's a lot of these commandments that there's two transgressions at once. Here we have one of them. To take an example, it's forbidden for a person to have sexual relations with his father, homosexual relations with his father. Like it says, Irvas avicha lo tegaleh. So in other words, this is an additional to the fact that, as we're going to learn, it's a homosexual relationships are forbidden. Homosexual sex is forbidden is forbidden. It's forbidden. That's one thing. Another one is that if a person does this with his father or any other relative, we'll see that it's a double sin. A person who does have relations with his fathers, etc., then if there's now another thing, an interesting thing, in Judaism, a person only gets the death penalty only applies. This is punishable by death. A person who does this by death, but the death penalty only applies if there were witnesses and the person who's doing the sin was warned before he did the sin, and he did the sin immediately after the warning with full consciousness and awareness. So it's very impossible, very difficult to actually punish somebody. But death from heaven, what's called kores, then if he does it on purpose, there's no witnesses, then the punishment is what's called kores, getting cut off. Some say the person dies before he's 50, 60. These punishments we see do not apply today. They who knows when they did apply, but in any case, it wasn't, we see it didn't work. It didn't prevent people from being drawn after this. Okay, generally speaking, any sin which if there were witnesses and a warning, and it's punishable by death, if there were no witnesses or there was improper warning, then it's punishable by getting cut off. And if a person does the sin, b'shogeg, in ignorance, he doesn't know that it's forbidden or whatever, then he has to that's when the Holy Temple kicks in. If a person does a purposeful sin, the Holy Temple doesn't help. It only helps on sins that were done in ignorance. In ignorance, or a person didn't know it was forbidden or whatever. He thought it was, anyway, okay. Okay, next, a negative commandment, a man cannot have relations with his mother. Like it says, the nakedness of your mother you cannot reveal, even if your mother, even if she is not married to your father. For instance, your father had relations with a woman, a prostitute, and you were born from this. Well, that woman, technically, that's called your mother. You can, if you have relations with that woman, then that's a sin. Nevertheless, she's your mother. Next, and it makes no difference if your father is still alive or if he's not alive anymore. Even if the father passed away, this woman, she's your mother. It's forbidden to have relations. Next negative commandment, not to have relations with your father's wife, even if she's not your mother. Your father has 10 wives. To have relations with one of these women is forbidden, even if she's not your mother. If she's from your father's, whether she's just engaged to your father, whether she's married, whether your father is alive, whether your father divorced her, whether your father is not alive anymore, nevertheless, you cannot ever marry your father's wife and have relations with her. If a person has relations with his father's wife and it's also his mother, then that's two sins. Then there's also what's called shniot. Shniot means your granddaughter, etc. That's only forbidden from the rabbis. It's forbidden, but it's forbidden from the rabbis. Now, you should know another thing, that things that are forbidden from the rabbis technically are also forbidden from the Torah, because the rabbis are commanded from the Torah to make offense. Remember, we learned about that also in Pirkei Avot. But the rabbis are commanded from the Torah to make commandments. There's a whole argument between the Rambam and the Ramban. It's called Milchemet Hashem, if they're forbidden from the Torah or not. Okay, negative commandment. You cannot have relations with your sister. A non-Jew is not the same as, but okay. A person can not have relations with his sister, whether it's a sister from your mother or a sister from your father. Okay, like it says, the punishment is koret, and by accident, again, you have to bring a sacrifice. Negative commandment, not to have relations with the daughter of your son, the granddaughter. It's a negative commandment not to have relations with the daughter of your daughter. Like it says, ervat bat bincha bat bitcha lo tegale ervatan. Here, interestingly enough, the punishment is sreifa, burning. What is burning? There are 4 death penalties in Judaism, 4 death penalties. They make no sense why there has to be 4. Some of them, the punishment is what's called burning, and some of them is choking, and some of them is stoning. They're not exactly what you might think. There's burning and choking and stoning and beheading. Beheading is like it says. Beheading is like it says. They would take a sword and they would chop off somebody's head. That's the death penalty. Now I just want to remind again, it says that if there was a court that found a person guilty once in every 7 years, it says that was a hanging court. It was almost impossible to impose this death penalty. Almost impossible. There were so many conditions that there had to be that it was almost impossible. Anyway, so one of them is beheading. Another one was choking. Choking means 2 people would put a rope around this person's neck and they would pull in opposite directions. They would sink his into the ground up to his knees so he couldn't run around, couldn't move, and they would choke him to death. Then there was stoning. Stoning is they would take a person and put him up on a high sort of platform. It was about 1 story high, something like that, a little bit higher, and put a big rock on his chest and push him off with this rock. And then if he would die, he would die. If not, then the witnesses, especially, they would stone him first. And then there was the punishment of burning. What's burning? Burning was the same thing as choking, basically, but they would open the person's mouth when he was choking, open his mouth, and they would pour hot lead down his throat. Now, again, I want to stress to you that this was, I don't know if it was ever done even in the whole history of Judaism, but if it was, very, very rare. And for sure, like something like 200 years before the end of the Second Temple, they stopped the death penalty totally. So that means for the last 2,000 something years, there hasn't been at all death penalty. And when it was there, it was almost impossible to apply. Why do there have to be different penalties? Why? Right? Why? So because it was some sort of a spiritual thing. Because the soul, we have to remember, is eternal. And if a person does one of these sins against what God is, so it wrecks up the purpose why he's in the world, why God put him in the world in the first place. We're learning about it in the mimer in the morning. Okay, a person cannot have a relation with the daughter of his son, or can have relations with his daughter of his daughter. A person cannot have relations with his daughter. Pretty logical. A person cannot have relations with his sister, whether she is the daughter of her mother or the daughter of your father. But if it's daughter, even if she's your sister, right? She's your sister. Let's say your father had a lot of different women, or he went to unmarried women, whatever, and he had a daughter. But if this girl is the daughter of your father, even if you don't know who her mother is, not the same mother, nevertheless, it's forbidden to have relations with her. A negative commandment, not to have relations with your aunt, the sister of your father, or the sister of your mother, another negative commandment. In other words, a man cannot marry his aunt. But interestingly enough, a girl can marry her uncle, according to Judaism. a girl can marry her uncle. In other words, a man can marry his, what's it called? His cousin, his nephew, niece. Right. A negative commandment. A person cannot have sexual relations with his uncle. Okay, this is going to be two sins. In other words, it's forbidden to have relations with a man. And this is in addition to that, because it's it's his uncle, his father's brother, so he can't have relations. It's a double sin. A person cannot have relations with the wife of his uncle's wife. Your father's, in other words, your father has a brother. You have an uncle from the side of your father. He's married. You can't have relations with this lady. Now, this is also a double one because you can't have relations with a married woman. This is only from your father's side. If he has relations to when her brother's alive, then he gets, the punishment is, like we said, choking, because it's also ishet ish. It's forbidden to have sexual relations with a married woman. That's what's mentioned in the 10 Commandments. Lotin Oaf is talking about having relations with a married woman. And after your uncle dies, to have relations with her, then the punishment is koret. Okay, next, let's just do two more, and we'll continue tomorrow. Reish base, wrong reish. A negative commandment: you cannot have relations with your son's wife. Like it says, ervat kalatcha lo tgaleh. Again, this is a double sin. You can't have relations with a married woman, and also this is an additional to that, it's also your relative. It's your daughter-in-law. And even after your son passes away, you can't marry her. It's forbidden to marry her, even after she passes away. One exception we're going to see to this is that if a person is married to a woman and she passes away, that you can get married to her sister. When a woman is alive, you cannot marry her and her sister together. But if she passes away, you can't. We'll get to that law. A negative commandment: you cannot here it is. You cannot have relations with the wife of your brother, your brother's wife. If you have relation with her brother is alive, then the punishment is choking, like we said before. Choking, if there's witnesses and etc. But afterwards, after your brother dies, you also can't get married to her or have relations with her. But there is a thing called yibum. And yibum, we'll talk about that later, that it's actually a commandment that if a person's brother passes away and he was married and didn't have children, then it's a commandment to marry his wife. He doesn't have to. He can renege if he wants to. Then they do what's called chalitza. A negative commandment: not to have relations with a woman and her daughter. You cannot marry a woman and her daughter together. You cannot have relations with a woman and her granddaughter, as basbana. A negative command: you can have relations with a woman and her granddaughter from the side of her daughter. In other words, you get married to a woman and she has already a daughter, and her daughter gave birth to a girl. You can't have relations with that girl either. Or let's say you got married to a lady and she has a son, and that son had a daughter. You can't have relations with that daughter either. It's forbidden. Let's just do one more, and that will be it for today. A negative commandment: you cannot have relations with the daughter of your wife. Because you have two sisters, right? There's two sisters. You get married to one of them. You cannot have relations with the other one while your wife is still alive. Like it says, Eshet bat isha el achota lo tikach litzror legalot ervata alel b'chayeha, when she's alive. From the time that he married a woman, it's forbidden to get married to her sister, whether it's her sister from her father, whether it's a sister from the mother, even if it's her sister that her father had relations with another lady, with a prostitute, and gave birth to this girl. It's her sister. She lives in who knows some faraway place. Nevertheless, it's forbidden to have relations. If he does, then even if he divorces his wife and he's not married to his wife anymore, he cannot get married to her sister. Only if if his wife passes away, then he can get married to her sister. These are the laws of Torah. This is called kadoshim. This is called being holy. This is holiness. Holiness connected very much to sexual relationships, because it's a thing which is given over to a person. A person thinks that it's his own, it's his private business. Leave me alone. I'll do what I want to. So specifically there is where a person has to be holy, as we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Have a good day with Mashiach now.